up, we're going to dive into our ARIN policy workshop. We're going to look at what the policies are in ARIN with regard to obtaining IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, as well as what the process for changing that policy is. So I'm going to introduce Owen Delong and Einar Bohlin. Owen is the IPv6 evangelist for Hurricane Electric, and Einar is the senior policy analyst at ARIN. Owen's also on the ARIN Advisory Council, so both experts in ARIN policy. And also, when looking for the slides here, I failed to mention at the very beginning, there is a Wi-Fi access point up that's open. It's the NA IPv6, and it then says CenturyLink in it. That should be an open access point that you can access to connect to the internet. What are your slides called? Maybe I didn't save them. None of those are them, right?
No.
Okay. I think I probably failed to. I sent them to Paul and didn't save them on my laptop.
Okay.
Let's see what happens here.
I don't have them on me.
No worries. I will find them.
It's the first time I've been in a situation where it's colder on stage than the enemies.
What was the name of the access point again?
It's NA IPv6 dash CenturyLink dash something. Dash dual. And it may not be working because I can't get on. You know where I think I have them is in. Do you know what it was called? The deck.
ARIN PDP and
There we go.
V4v6.
That'll work. It's still in my cache.
Cool.
Make sure this works. There we go. All right, sorry about the wait, guys. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Einar and Owen for the PDP look.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chris, and the Colorado chapter of ISOC for inviting us here and hosting this meeting. My name's Einar Bohlin. I'm the policy analyst at ARIN, and co-hosting and presenting with me is Owen Delong, as Chris said. So we're going to talk about the policy development process first. And the reason we're going to talk about the policy development process is it's because that's where all the V4, V6, and number policies come from. And it's actually what sustains and maintains those policies. If we skip over the process, then you start to think that policies perhaps carved in stone, which isn't the case. Policies have changed over time, and they can continue to be changed. So if there's something that you see today or in the future, or somebody comes to you and says this policy at ARIN stinks, you guys can tell them that they can try to change that policy. So at a high level, we're going to talk about the process, V4 policy and transfers, V6 policy evolution, and V6 policy itself. So the policies that we're talking about are ARIN number resource policies. These are the policies that the policy process can change or create or get rid of. They're all contained in a document called the policy manual. And this manual's on the ARIN website. It's got all of ARIN's number policy. It's got a change log, so it's got all of the versions of the policy manual back through time. And these are the types of policies that are contained in that manual. V4 policy, V6, autonomous system number policy, policies about directory services or WHOIS, policies about reverse DNS, transfers, experimental assignments, and resource reviews. So the process itself is of course, on the ARIN website. There's a flow chart to help people that like to see things visually. There's a simple little template that is to be used to fill in and officially kick off or submit a proposal. There's an archive of the process because the process itself has been refined over time. And there's a special section on petitions, which I'll get into in a minute. These are the principles of the process. It's open, as we just heard. Anyone can participate. You don't have to be a member of ARIN. All you need is an email address and the time or the wherewithal to go ahead and participate. You don't have to be a member to attend ARIN meetings. You don't even have to attend in person. We webcast the meetings, and we provide the means for people to submit questions and comment on things remotely. You can watch the webcast, log into Jabber, and participate almost as if you're there. The second principle there is transparency. Everything's documented. Some organizations hide their processes, don't make their documents available for free. Everything at ARIN is on our website. You can even see all of the previous meetings. We archive the webcasts. So you can find everything on the ARIN site. And it's bottom up. Some people think that ARIN staff comes up with number policy and forces it upon people, the community, but that's not the case. We implement policy that the community tells us to do. So there's some identifiable roles in the policy process. The first one's the community submits proposals and does the bulk of the discussion. And the discussion feeds into this body called the Advisory Council, which is a 15-member body. They're elected volunteers. We actually have 3 of them in the room today. Chris, Owen, and then David Farmer in the back of the room there. And they're tasked by the process to take proposals, work with the author, make sure they get a clear problem statement, and develop policy that is fair and impartial, technically sound, and supported by the community. The ARIN board has a role in the policy process. Inherently, the board has a corporate fiduciary role. They're responsible for ARIN, the organization. But in the process, they tasked themselves with making sure that the policy process is properly followed. And ultimately, they recommend policies they adopt policies that are recommended to them by the AC. And then the board tells staff to implement the policies. And finally, when staff implements policies, sometimes things are revealed or found out that were unexpected, and we report those things, and as you can imagine, the cycle just circles around. Here are the basic steps from submitting a proposal to implementation. If someone has an idea to change a policy or create a new one or get rid of one, you can submit a proposal. And the advisory council takes that proposal and works with the author to make a clear problem statement and good suggested policy text. And if when that work is finished, the advisory council puts a thing called a draft policy on the public policy mailing list for discussion by the community. And these items, 3 and 4, are the real core of the process. This is the discussion. This is the discussion that the community does to say whether or not this is a good idea. They provide feedback about how to revise or refine the text, and it's really the core part of the process. The advisory council at this point has a really big decision to make. Should we continue to work on this thing, or should we get rid of it? And if it's moving forward, the AC continues to work on the text until they get something that they can recommend be adopted. That thing is discussed on the list, goes to a meeting, and is normally sent to last call, given to the board, and if the board adopts it, then staff implements. That's pretty quick, but that's it from a suggestion to a policy. If you want to see exactly all of the minutia of how this process works, like I said before, the process is on the website, but this is it in a nutshell. The Advisory Council has a pretty powerful role in this process, and to balance that, there's a thing called a petition process within the PDP. So if someone thinks that the Advisory Council is causing a delay, they're not advancing something quickly enough, or if the AC has abandoned something and you think that that's a mistake, you can try to either resurrect something if it's been abandoned, or push something forward if you think it's been delayed. And there's some criteria for petitions. There have been about a dozen petitions that have happened in the last 10 years. About half of those were successful, half weren't. One item petitioned went all the way and actually became adopted policy. So it's an important process. It's not used very often, but it works. So that was pretty quick about the PDP, the policy development process. But it's what gives all of the policies their strength, if you were. Now we're going to talk about the policies themselves. When John Curran finished up, there was a question about what, if anything, is there a V4 policy that's going to change? Is the V4 policy going to change at ARIN when we get to our last /8? And the answer is no. We are doing regular V4 policy until the end. Now, if you haven't been paying attention for the last couple of years, the biggest two V4 policy changes are that ISPs used to be able to get a 1-year supply of addresses, but in 2011, that was reduced to a 3-month supply. So ISPs in the ARIN region can get a 3-month supply of addresses. And also, the end user minimum was reduced from, I think, from a 22 to a 24. So if you're a multi-homed end user in the ARIN region, you can request and get a /24 directly from ARIN. And then there was a carve out. There's this /10 that's been already set aside to be a special pool of address space at the very end for organizations that have V6 space and they need a little piece to connect to the V4 internet. So that /10 is going to be used to help those organizations connect to the net. There's a panel on transfers later this afternoon, so we're not going to get into too much detail about this, but we do have a transfer policy. If you're an organization in the ARIN region and you have excess V4 space and you would like to transfer some of that to somebody that needs V4 space, there's a policy that allows you to do that. So you can do that not only within region, but you can do it to and from the ARIN region to RIRs that have a similar compatible needs-based transfer policy. Right now, the other RER that has that is APNIC. There's 5 RERs in total: ARIN, APNIC, Right, BlackNIC, and AFRINIC. The other 3 RERs up there, Right, BlackNIC, and AFRINIC, are currently discussing proposals to enact some kind of inter-RER transfer policy. And there's criteria for both of these, but they're for within region and inter-RER, but they're both based on need. And now I'm transitioning into V6 policy. And the first thing we're going to do is go through where V6 policy started, and then we're going to come up to where we are today. And part of the motivator for this was I worked the ARIN booth here at the V6 Task Force or Summit last year, and these are some of the questions I got while working the booth. Can end users get V6 space? Is a /56 a viable assignment size? Can we get more than a 32? These are some of the questions that were asked by pretty much the people attending this conference are the smartest, savviest V6 people in North America. So it was kind of interesting to get these questions. And these are all things that people asked in the past and became proposals and changed policy. So ARIN started with this thing called the Provisional V6 Policy. And it was based off an RFC that defined the V6 address space. And the RFC said where the dividers are between for allocations to ISPs and what customers would get. And basically you had /35s to ISPs and 48s to customers. The 35s were in a reserve 29 and the RERs got 23s. And it was expected, it said in the RFC, that the customers would be transit providers and exchange points. So this is the policy that started at ARIN, and discussion of this policy started immediately and went on for a couple years. And it actually hasn't even stopped. The policy that first started has been continually evolving. Even today, there's a proposal about changing V6 policy. In 2000, there were a couple more assignment sizes that were added to ARIN's policy set. So if you were a regular, if an ISP had customers that were end users of normal size, they'd get a 48. If it was a customer that had just a single LAN or a single subnet, they'd get a 64. And if it was a customer that had just the need for exactly one IP address, they'd get a 128. Probably dial up or something like that. Then the first formally numbered proposal about V6, 2001-3, is a policy that was implemented that allowed internet exchange points to get 48s. They just apparently didn't need 32s. And then, let's see, 2001-4, there was a policy that said 35s weren't big enough for ISPs, and it changed the allocation, the default allocation size from a 35 to a 32. There was an experimental address policy that included V6 space. 2003-4, there was a policy that made it easier for ISPs to get V6 space because they could use a 5-year plan instead of 2. And then in 2004, the allocation unit to the RERs got much bigger, from a 23 to a 12. And this is my switchover slide to Owen.
Okay, I'm going to end up looking at those slides because it's too hard to read on here. 2005-1, provider independent IPv6 assignments for end sites. This was the first policy in the world that actually allowed for end users to get direct assignments from regional internet registries of IPv6 space. And the particular reason that Einar's handing the slide off to me at this point is that is a policy proposal that I wrote back in those days, and was not too far after my beginnings of being involved in ARIN. I think I'd been involved in ARIN about 2 or 3 years by that point. 2005-5 changed the HD ratio from 0.8 to 0.94. 2005-8 amended the ARIN IPv6 assignment and utilization requirement. This really was the application of a great deal of IPv4 think to IPv6, and it's kind of unfortunate, but it allowed for consideration of /56s instead of 48s as end site assignments. Having gotten to know more about IPv6 over the years, I think that one is kind of questionable, but it's on the books, so we have it. 2007-21, IPv6 for legacy holders with RSA and efficient use. I think I also wrote that one. That was end users who already have IPv4 shouldn't have to jump through a lot of hoops to qualify for IPv6. Obviously, if they've already qualified for v4, they have met the basic criteria we intended, and that should be sufficient to allow them to get v6. That did remove a lot of hurdles for a lot of people, and I think it did significantly increase the adoption rate at which people were getting v6 from ARIN, at least. 2008-3, community networks. This proposal still hasn't quite had as much use as we would like, but it's designed to try and make it easier for neighbor nets to get reasonable amounts of IPv6 space and deploy without costing too much. In 2009, we saw multiple discrete networks brought forward into IPv6 policy. That was kind of an oversight that got left out when the multiple discrete networks policy was created, and so we brought that up to date. 2009-7, open access to IPv6. This basically removed the requirement that people who got an IPv6 allocation advertise it as a single aggregate. It allowed people to start doing traffic engineering in IPv6. It was really a matter of practicality. In 2010, we completely reworked the IPv6 allocation criteria. Actually, this was a small rework. We changed it from 200 customers to 50 customers in 5 years. So that made it a lot easier for ISPs to get IPv6. 2010-8, a similar rework of the assignment criteria. No, actually, those were the major reworks. Those were where we also went to using nibble boundary allocations. So instead of 32, 31, 30, 29, ISPs get a 32, or if they're bigger than that, they can get a 28 or a 24 or a 20. But we're now issuing all space on nibble boundaries for both allocations and assignments. This simplifies human factors. It makes life generally a lot easier, and it allows you to actually generally obtain quite a bit more room for growth and plan your network a little bit more consistently over time. 2010-12, subsequent allocation. This allowed a 24 maximum for transition technology as an additional allocation independent of your existing utilization. Yes?
In the previous bullet point, what do you define a site to be?
A site, an end site in terms of policy for V6, if I remember the exact wording, is a single building or structure or a single tenant in a multi-tenant building or structure. So, for example, a university dorm could be defined as several hundred sites. And you could allocate several hundred /48s to a single dorm building, potentially. 2010-14 standardizes IP assignment registration requirements, requires SWIPs of static addresses greater than or equal to /64. Moving further forward in history, we had a proposal that was literally titled Better IPv6 Allocations for ISPs. This was the ISP nibble boundary proposal that I mistook the other one for. This substantially simplified the allocation criteria. It also moved us off of HD ratio and onto a simple 75% utilization criteria. If you're using more than 75% overall, or if you're using more than 90% in any of your any particular sub-allocation, then you have enough that you can grow your ARIN allocation as necessary. 2012-2, subsequent allocations and utilization requirement. No more space to assign to new sites, but we don't meet the utilization for more. That proposal is still under discussion. End user policy. Previously, the block size was based on HD ratio. It was complex. It used logarithms. Now the block size is based solely on the number of sites within a network and essentially what we call a 25% min-free. So if you've got one site, you get a 48. If you've got 2 to 12 sites, you get a 44, which is enough for 16 sites, thus preserving your 25% min-free. 13 to 192, you get a /40. Again, that gives you 64 extra sites beyond your 192. So you've still got 25% room for growth there, et cetera, et cetera. Allocations for ISPs, the block size is based on 3 things: your number of serving sites, your number of customers at the largest serving site, and the prefix length to be assigned to customers. And the prefix length that is taken into account in that is the smallest prefix you give to customers. So if you give 56s to residential customers and 48s to business customers, for example, you'd better be able to justify that each of your business customers needs 256 allocations. It's a lot easier to just give everybody 48s in that case. The number of serving sites, you kind of get to pick one layer of aggregation point within your network for this determination, whether it's a POP or whether it's further up your aggregation hierarchy, and count all of the end sites under that particular layer, round that up to a nibble, and then multiply that by the total number of serving sites, and round that up to a nibble in terms of determining your prefix size. It sounds complex, but it's actually a fairly easy exercise to go through. Let's say you're going to use POPs, your direct end user distribution points, as your serving site in this case. You take the number of end users at your largest serving site and round that up to a nibble boundary. So if you've got 3,000 users or 3,000 end sites served out of that point, then you would round up to 4096 or 12 bits. Let's say you're assigning each of them a 48. That would give you a 36 for each of those serving sites. Then you count up your total number of anticipated serving sites over the next 5 years, round that up to a nibble boundary. So let's say you've got 35 POPs. Well, that would round up to 256, so 8 bits. So we take the 36 per point of presence, subtract another 8 bits from that, and you find that you need to apply for a /28. In terms of the allocations, they're always nibble aligned, so the next step up from 32 is 28, then 24, etc. You can request a second initial allocation. If you got an initial allocation under the old policy that is smaller than what you'd be entitled to under the new policy, you simply come back to ARIN and say, I've refactored my allocation based on the new policy. Please give me an appropriate sized block. And ARIN will, if possible, expand your existing block to that size. If that's not possible, then they will hand you an entire new block, and you are encouraged through attrition over time to return the block if it becomes free, but you're not required to jump through any Herculean effort to return the block, the old block, in any particular time frame. You are not required to deploy your services according to the aggregation points that you've used for your justification, but certainly you should use something that is actually an aggregation point within your network so that your subsequent allocation requests can line up with your actual network deployment in some way. Subsequent allocations for transitional technologies. This is an additional allocation separate from your main allocation that allows you to deploy a technology such as 6RD without polluting your normal addressing plan for native users. These are temporary in nature, and this policy is on notice that it could get rescinded when no longer needed. There's a /24 maximum allocation within this policy. You can't get any more than that. That allows a typical ISP to match /56s for each customer or end site onto their existing IPv4 addresses in a 6RD deployment with the full width 32-bit IPv4 address. And so far, 8 allocations have apparently been issued. Today at ARIN, IPv6 policy is the most liberal of all of the RIRs. I'm hoping to change that over time at the other RIRs. The 2013 IPv6 policy looks a lot like the 1993 IPv4 policy. Personally, in my opinion, that's a good thing. The reason that we had to switch off of the 1993 IPv4 policy wasn't because it didn't work out well technically, it was because IPv4 had too small of an address space. Well, IPv6 doesn't have too small of an address space, so let's go back to a policy that worked really well with enough addresses. Things could change. If you want them to change, participate in the process. If you like the status quo, pay attention because other people don't, and if you don't like the way they want to change it, you need to speak up. References, I won't read the slide, but the URLs are in the slide deck so that you can refer to them later. And with that, we open it up to sort of a discussion format. Sylvia.
I have a question about global routing. Thank you. We had some discussions with large enterprises that have locations on every continent. Mm-hmm. And there were many discussions. Some changed their IPv6 addressing concept to have allocations from each region to make sure that routing would always be a safe thing. And now I heard a couple of times, and I would like to know if that is true, that there is a special prefix assigned for global routing issues for enterprises like that. Is that true, or is that a rumor?
That's the first I've heard of anything at all like that.
So what would you recommend these enterprises? Should they get allocations from each region?
As a general rule, if you've got your own backbone network and it's all contiguous, and you're willing to advertise it as a single aggregate everywhere, then I think getting a single prefix from one RIR and routing it globally is perfectly fine. If you're going to route it separately anyway, then in general you should get it from the region where it's going to be deployed.
Yeah, in most cases, all locations have their own ISPs in every region, right?
Right.
So-
So in that case, I would recommend, getting it separate allocations for each site in the
Okay.
region.
What about cross-region redundancy? So you want to fail over your RIPE data center to the
Well,
America?
there's nothing that I know of, and certainly there's nothing in RIR policy, because RIRs don't control routing, that prevents you from advertising a prefix you obtained in Europe out of a router that is located in the United States or vice versa. The policies are primarily about where the addresses are utilized, and even in that case, they're pretty liberal about that, in that if you are operating a global backbone and you're getting all of your address space from your headquarters RIR, that is generally, to the best of my knowledge, accepted if you're advertising it as a single aggregate. If you're advertising it as more specifics, then it's fine to advertise the more specifics across different regions, but they should be doing that in order to get those packets to the hosts that are in the correct region.
But the size of your block is only determined by your assets within that region. So you can't go to ARIN and say, look, I've got all these sites all over the world. I want a block to do the whole world.
I'll
possible?
defer to John on that one, but to the best of my knowledge, if you have a backbone and intend to advertise it as a single aggregate, they do allow you to use more than just what you have locally.
So recognize that, in fact, this will be discussed next week at the ARIN meeting. The ARIN policy recognizes that it has to be used in the region. It doesn't say exclusively within the region. So we do have multinationals who come in ARIN's region and say, this is for my global network, and get a very large assignment for that purpose. And then they may announce that not only in our region, but in other regions. We also don't track whether they've gone and gotten an address assignment from another RIR for some of that infrastructure. With respect to V6, this is all pretty fine no matter how it works. There's sufficient space that there's no reason why you couldn't get that additional allocation. The RIRs do not, there's no requirement that your addresses aggregate in the region, because no one's announcing the RIR/12 IPv6 blocks. So you're free to get address space from ARIN based on that doesn't preclude you from getting address space in RIR and announcing it if that means later on.
I think the battery is dying in that microphone.
But when we went, we did this a while back, we went to ARIN and we showed our worldwide sites, and they said you can only justify the size of your allocation by the assets within the ARIN region.
Are you talking about V6 or V4? V6. If you, I will double check that, but to my knowledge, when you get your allocation, if you say you're getting a single allocation to use globally, there's no reason you can't. If you actually have discrete networks that are announced discretely in other parts of the globe, then yes, we would have told you those are discrete networks, and we would say don't count that for that purposes. If you already have networks that are being announced distinctly, then we would tell you to continue to do that. We don't, that's probably where it came from. But there are both end users and ISPs who go for a single block. In any case, if your address block is at all utilized and you've hit a reasonable level of utilization, you can come back and get additional space. And every block that we reserve is sparsely allocated. So it's actually allocated from a block 16 times that size. So expanding in your current block, if and when you need to, is trivial to do.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? David, did you have something?
I think one of the questions that's asked is do you have a network of your own connecting them? And so if you're using the internet to connect all of this and glue it all together, then you need to get it from the other regions. If you have your own network connecting it all, then that's considered one piece of infrastructure, and you can get one aggregate block for it. If it's multiple networks, that's not one piece of infrastructure, that's multiple pieces of infrastructure.
Okay, I think we've got a question down here in front. Can we get the mic up to you? Because we're webcasting this and people that are remote can't hear you.
Well, I mostly just have questions about sort of these allocations and trying to figure out what size of address block you should be looking for. And today, I mean, our institution is in the business of handing out individual addresses to individual machines that are connected to our network university.
Okay.
And so, I don't have a whole lot of anticipated need to, I mean, in theory, I could give a student their own network in a dorm, but today I don't have anybody asking me for that. And so
It's an internal policy decision within your organization. The policy allows you to assign up to a /48 per student in a dorm,
okay.
per room. Well, even if you've got 2 students in the room, arguably that's 2 tenants, you could assign them each a 48. So, you don't have to assign it. That's just the maximum allowed without additional justification. If you want to assign a student a 44 in their dorm room, you'd better have a really good reason why they need 16 times 65,536 subnets.
Yes.
Dale, wait for the mic.
Okay, just to be clear, so if you have an organization like a university, and they're acting like a service provider to their students, and they're providing service, whether it's a fee or it's included, then they can count them as end customers and provide an allocation to each and every one of them.
If the students are living in a dorm controlled by the university where the university is providing internet access,
Correct.
then yes, they're tenants within that multi-tenant dorm building, and each tenant is an end site.
So in the same sense, can an enterprise that has a centralized IT group that's servicing multiple customers, take someone like a GE, let's say they come and they have multiple business units within the same building, then they could count each one of those as a separate tenant and service those separately?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
In fact, I know of an organization that you're familiar with that we did something very similar to that, and they ended up getting a /24 not too long ago.
Were you at Lisa earlier?
I was.
End of last year? Okay, I think I asked you this similar question last year, or there.
Apparently I failed to answer it.
Well, it's more for my network guy's benefit and hopefully for other people. But we're a smallish company, like 150 people, right?
Okay.
But we have 2 data centers and 2 offices. With that, and with the 2 data centers, we would like to have at least individual space for each of them, but plus a shared space that we could announce out just with BGP.
How's a 44 sound?
Awesome. But now we need to get an ASN, right? And isn't that where the problem comes in?
If you're not multi-homed, then you're probably not going to be getting your IP allocation from ARIN directly anyway as an end user.
Right. So,
If you are multi-homed, then you have an ASN.
Right. So today we
Or
pay
more.
our data center providers for that. But the goal would be is each data center provider, they're separate providers, we would treat them as, effectively a single multi-home.
Well, in order to be multi-homed, each site has to have more than one upstream provider that they're communicating BGP with.
And they do. So that's not a problem.
No,
don't.
your data center, your thing within the data center is
Right.
currently single-homed to the data center. The data center is multi-homed.
Right.
So the data center could come to ARIN and apply for space on that basis. But if you want to consider your piece of the data center multi-homed, then you need to multi-home that not only to the data center operator that it's co-located with, but to some other provider as well.
Right.
I see your hand, David. I'll get to you in a moment.
Okay. And so would it be possible to just ask the provider to both announce it and skip the ASN process?
Well,
If they're willing to, I'm
I
guessing.
I suppose you probably technically could, but I don't know. I think there's a requirement for the ASN in. That's only one of the clauses. That's only, okay. So yes, you can qualify without an AS number, and you can, in theory, get both providers to announce it, but there are technical reasons you probably don't want to do that, not the least of which is if the providers are statically announcing your address space, usually the point of multi-homing is to have some redundancy. And if one of them loses its connection to you and keeps announcing your address space, that's known as a black hole route.
Right. Well, since we're physically in their space, we should never have that happen, you know, but.
So having been a data center operator, I can assure you that it does happen.
Right.
Somebody goes into the room to do moves, adds, changes, and unplugs the wrong cable, and now your cross connect to provider B is gone, but your cross connect to provider A is still there. Well, yes,
Yeah.
You know, a guy with a pair of wire cutters or grabbing the ends of RJ45 cables can be just as effective as a backhoe at eliminating a circuit within a data center.
Right.
So it does happen. And so I would recommend just get an AS and announce BGP, and it makes your life so much easier in general.
Okay.
So,
And then my second question is, how do you see the, last mile providers, CenturyLink, Comcast, those guys, once we get past the RD perspective, point, how do you see them doling out space to homes effectively?
well, ideally, I envision them giving out /48s. I know they're not intending to do that, unfortunately, and it's going to break things in the long run. But for the time being, I think most of them are planning on giving out tiny little /56s, and some of them are even worse and talking about ridiculous things like 60s and 64s.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Where to next, Owen?
I believe this guy.
Okay.
It's very good information. I'd just like to know if there's. I've trawled all our websites, and to get that interpretation out of that information, I don't get the same story. Is there any way we can go to get more up to date or translated information?
Well, let me take a stab at it first, since I'm the one actually up here. Are we connected to the internet here?
Yeah, it's just a little slow.
Oh, okay.
Very slow.
Should I launch my mobile hotspot?
Are you looking for the NRPM? What are you looking for?
Yeah. So in the NRPM, on ARIN's website, if you go to the ARIN website and you go here to policies, there's a little tab that says Number Resource Policy Manual. And you scroll down to 654
Eventually.
Someday.
eventually. Maybe I am going to whip out my mobile hotspot. There we go. Okay, so we scroll down here to Section 6, which covers IPv6 conveniently. Section 4 covers IPv4 as well. And we go to Policies for Allocations and Assignments, Section 6.5. 6.5.4 is assignments from LIRs and ISPs. We actually want direct assignments to end users, so 6.5.8. And in 6.5.8, organizations may justify an initial assignment for addressing devices directly attached to their own infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Previously justified IPv4, currently initial assignment size, 6.5.8.2. More than one but less than 12 sites justified receives a /44. He just talked about 4 sites. Two data centers and 2 offices. Oh, you're going back to your old question.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
That is very well hidden.
That is indeed vague and inconspicuous in the policy manual.
So, one of the things that ARIN does at every meeting is we give a policy experience report where the staff says the following language written by the community has multiple interpretations or has non-logical interpretations. And we'd like to note that we've had questions from people saying, why is this not clear, not obvious, etc. We actually, next week, will be doing one. I recommend everyone, you can go online, it'll be webcast. We're covering 4 or 5 sections of NRPM and where the staff has either a lack of clarity from the language from the community or has, in some cases, contradictory language. And this we sort of give as feedback so that they can do policy proposals to clean it up and make it clearer. But it's written by a group. It's written by different authors who come from different perspectives. So that can be very interesting because people have different ideas of what's a site, what's a network, what's a customer. And so there are times when it does not flow as a cohesive whole. And all I can say is that the particular case you raised is on next week's slides.
I will also point out that we recently had a proposal that attempted to clarify that, and it went down to resounding defeat due to lack of support from the community. For those of you that want to know about the meeting that John just mentioned, by the way, it'll be even more fun if you're able to attend in person because it's in a really great location this time.
Any others for the mic?
This is the definition of an end site, by the way. Make it legibly larger. So, single structure or service delivery address, or in the case of a multi-tenant structure, a single tenant within said structure, a single customer location. I was close. It helps when you wrote the language. Okay, well, thank you very much.